debut in the Gulf War of an elite undercover regiment. The SAS, conceived in the desert campaigns of World War II, the apparently innocent cover for one of the first operations carried out by waterborne special forces, the counterinsurgency war in Malaya and Borneo. American tactics were snatching men from danger and the public disasters when a mission goes wrong. The not-so-elite soldiers of fortune fighting rebellion in Africa, and the Soviets fighting revolution at home. The British Special Air Service, the SAS, perhaps the most famous of the world's special forces. The regiment was born in the Sahara Desert. It was 1941, and far behind German lines, British soldiers were conducting highly dangerous operations. These soldiers were known as the Long Range Desert Group, but they were the forefathers of the SAS. Between undercover operations, they were happy to pose for the camera. The SAS would later become one of the world's most secretive military organizations. But these men were willing to demonstrate their ability to survive in one of the world's harshest environments. They would often spend weeks behind enemy lines, spying on supply routes, monitoring any buildup of Nazi forces. Every aspect of German logistics and troop movements came under close scrutiny. The chief objective was to stop Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who was threatening to sweep into Egypt with his formidable Afrika Korps. The success of the early undercover operations encouraged Winston Churchill to agree to the formation of a special force to attack targets behind enemy lines. The sabotage raids were so successful, the Germans were forced to divert frontline troops to guard their rear. The disruption of Rommel's strategy was a vital factor in the British victory to come at El Alamein, a turning point in the Second World War. The new force, brainchild of Lieutenant Colonel David Stirling, was first known as L Detachment Special Air Service Brigade, giving a deliberately false impression of its numbers. This rare footage shows an early SAS unit in action against sniper positions in the woods of Western Germany in 1944. The special boat service enjoys a similar mystique. A schooner lies off an idyllic Aegean island. Here, some of the earliest pictures of Britain's seaborne equivalent of the SAS. Highly trained in silent waterborne landings, they had already seen action against German bases in the Greek islands. Now they were charged with a series of raids to tie down German resources far from the Allied offensives in Italy and Normandy. Here, the SBS, reinforced by local islanders of the Greek Sacred Squadron, prepared to take the mountainous island of Simi, just off the Turkish coast. The morning assault opened with a barrage from a squadron of Royal Navy Fairmile corvettes, softening up enemy positions for the assault by SBS men landed under cover of darkness. Surprise was complete and measured by the light SBS casualties. While 15 enemy troops were killed and nearly 150 taken prisoner, SBS casualties numbered just a handful of light injuries. One of 2 German craft captured in the raid. In common with their tactics of striking without warning and disappearing just as quickly, the assault force withdrew 24 hours after the attack, leaving a clandestine observation team hidden on the island. Post-war action followed in the so-called Malaya Emergency, when persistent communist incursions threatened to destabilize the colony. SAS teams sent via the staging post at Ipoh successfully frustrated the threat. 10-day deep penetration patrols. Close-knit jungle made passage extremely difficult. At best, they expected to cover 2,000 meters in a day. Resupply was almost entirely by air, and SAS teams also parachuted into the dense jungle in a dangerous maneuver known as tree jumping. Injuries were frequent. The Malayan Scouts, basis of the 22nd SAS Regiment, officially organized in May 1952, spearheaded the counter-insurgency operations. A fresh emergency developed in Borneo, when the newly independent state of Malaysia came under threat from Indonesia. Indonesia mounted cross-border raids in an attempt to take over the former British protectorate. The SAS role here, as in Malaya, policing the jungle. Small patrols would be spaced some 20 miles apart, integrating with villagers and covering the most obvious approaches from Indonesian Borneo. Royal Navy helicopters were used to resupply men as well as provisions and ammunition, the first use of helicopters in this role, and a vital lesson for the future conflict in Vietnam. These were the Tiptoe Boys, lightly armed patrols living in the jungle for up to 100 days, laying ambushes and directing occasional RAF strikes. Bombing was rare because, unlike in Vietnam, the SAS considered airstrikes more likely to kill innocent natives. A lightly armed patrol was a welcome break. These men carried personal weapons, water and rations, and for long periods lived off the land. Briefings of Malaysian patrols would be based on the vast amount of information they collected on operations lasting upwards of 3 months. Maps based on this information would be provided for wider briefings.
Mesti ada orang Jawa, orang musuh, orang Indonesia. Barangkali ada Jalai, kawasan Rumahan Piandekaka, tengah-tengah.
Good, all right, thank you.
Their information gave mortar teams their targets. These operations of inroad and foray had to be carefully planned and rehearsed. Only troops well versed in jungle warfare could take part. A team of Gurkhas plays the part of an Indonesian army patrol on a hit-and-run mission. They even wear Indonesian helmets. It's a chance for new boys to witness the dangers of carelessness in the country. This was not for real. But the Claret operations were. These were cross-border patrols infiltrating Indonesia itself, a luxury the Americans later in Vietnam could not afford. They were intended to stem the level of incursions and keep the campaign on the level of an undeclared war. Enemy parties would be ambushed along jungle tracks or on rivers, and their forward bases destroyed by SAS-led patrols, striking up to 6 miles into enemy territory. The technique of fortified villages was another lesson for the future Vietnam War. It defended villages from infiltration and denied food to the communist guerrillas. In 3 years of confrontation, the clandestine communist organizations were effectively neutralized. London in the spring. A peaceful tree-lined street became the scene of the regiment's most famous action. Here was the Iranian embassy. Inside, 6 terrorists who'd taken 21 hostages to back demands for the freedom of 91 Arabs imprisoned in Iran. Armed police surrounded the building, and within hours an SAS team was on hand. During the 5 days of tedious but patient negotiations that followed, they made a full-size replica of the embassy and endlessly rehearsed their plan to assault the building. Action was assured when the terrorists killed a hostage and threatened to repeat the violence every half hour until their demands for an escape flight were met. The SAS plan required split-second timing. Sensitive microphones lowered down a chimney were already monitoring everything the terrorists said, and pin-sized television cameras recorded every move. Now 2 SAS teams would abseil down the rear of the embassy and break in just as a third team at the front blew out a window to complete a pincer move. They went into action at dinner time. At the front, the framed charge of plastic explosives was manhandled into position. This would be used to blow out the embassy's armoured front window, timed to coincide with the similar action at the rear. The troopers, dressed in menacing black and armed with Heckler and Koch submachine guns, stormed in, using their unique flashbang grenades to stun opposition inside. The first hostage scrambled clear, the first to benefit from techniques the SAS had been perfecting for 7 years. The whole incident was over within 12 minutes, though the firefight caused a blaze which badly damaged the building. 5 of the 6 terrorists had been shot dead. 1 had 82 bullet wounds. But all 21 hostages were unharmed in an incident that dramatically enhanced the regiment's reputation, even if the publicity meant new techniques would have to be devised. The Falklands War returned the SAS to a military role, its most famous exploit being the retaking of the Antarctic island of South Georgia. To prepare for the assault on Grytviken, SBS patrols would land secretly at Hound Bay, while the SAS were inserted by helicopter on Fortuna Glacier. But the operation was almost a disaster. D Squadron's mountain troop took off in 3 Wessex helicopters. Their job was the usual one of careful reconnaissance, to guide Royal Marine Commandos to a speedy and successful assault. In normal times, the island is a barren, frozen waste, but conditions in the early southern autumn quickly became impossible. Gales and treacherous ice forced the SAS team to abandon their mission. In attempting to evacuate the troop, 2 Wessex were wrecked, and all the men and crews had to be taken back to the Antrim in one grossly overloaded helicopter. The Argentine submarine Santa Fe managed to land 40 reinforcements before being disabled by British helicopters and beached at Grytviken. In the event, the island was retaken virtually without a shot being fired, the SAS capitalizing on the Argentine soldiers' apparent lack of will to resist. The British had regained South Georgia just 22 days after the Argentinians captured it. The American Special Operations Force modelled on SAS successes over several decades. These are the so-called A-teams. They have to be skilled